He was losing blood. In the chaos around him, all he could see was the black German shepherd leaning over him, trying to protect him. "Go, buddy, go," James whispered with his last strength. But Shadow didn't move. That look in his eyes, as if he understood everything. James Wilson sat in a dark room. He twirled a glass of whiskey with his trembling fingers, his eyes fixed on the shadows on the wall. Shadow lay beside him, his black German shepherd alert with watchful eyes. The scar on James's face, a former Special Forces soldier, became more visible in the dim light. It had been 3 years since he left service, but some memories never faded. The nightmares still haunted him, blood-soaked sand, the screams of his teammates, and Shadow's unyielding protection even as bullets flew. Dr. Adams, his VA therapist, had warned him about isolation, but the only company James could tolerate was Shadow's. The dog understood his moods in ways no human could. Rain pattered against the windows of his Spartan apartment, furnished only with essentials, a military habit he couldn't break. Photos of his former squad sat in a drawer, too painful to display but impossible to discard. Only Michael Rivera's picture remained on the mantel, his best friend who'd introduced him to Shadow as a puppy before Michael was killed in action. He jumped when his phone rang. Shadow immediately stood up, sharp eyes turning toward the door. James answered the phone, his voice hoarse. It was his former commander, Colonel Richards, on the other end. James's face tightened. When he hung up, he turned to Shadow. "We need to go, buddy." "There's a big problem," he said. Shadow's ears perked forward, his intelligent eyes reflecting understanding far beyond normal canine capabilities. It was a look James had seen countless times in combat, an almost supernatural awareness that had saved his life more times than he could count. Shadow responded with a sharp bark, as if understanding every word. James quickly moved to the closet and pulled out a metal safe he hadn't opened in years. From inside, he took not his old uniform, but just a small USB drive. He put Shadow's leash on, and they left. As they walked through the empty streets of the city, James looked tense. Colonel Richards' words echoed in his mind. "The files were stolen, James. We need to get them back, or we're all in danger." Detective Sarah Chen watched them from her unmarked police car across the street. She'd been monitoring James for weeks after his name appeared in connection with a classified military investigation. Her partner, Detective Rodriguez, thought it was a waste of resources, but Chen's instincts told her otherwise. She snapped photos as James and Shadow moved purposefully through the rain-slicked streets. James sensed the surveillance, but didn't break stride. 3 years of civilian life hadn't dulled his training. Shadow stayed close, occasionally glancing back. The dog had always been better at detecting threats than even the most advanced equipment. Thunder rumbled overhead as they approached the industrial district. The abandoned buildings loomed like sentinels, windows dark and accusing. James remembered the last time he'd been here, a training exercise gone wrong that had cost 2 men their lives. Shadow had found the survivors then, leading James through smoke and rubble with unerring precision. When they reached the old building, Shadow suddenly stopped, his nose in the air as if smelling danger. James bent down and whispered in the dog's ear, "I know, buddy. I feel it too." When the door opened, the person standing there took James's breath away. It was Captain Miller, his old teammate. He thought he was dead. Miller smiled, but his eyes were cold. "It's good to see you, James. Come in. We have things to talk about." Shadow growled softly. James's hand moved over the dog's back. "Easy, buddy," he said, but an inner voice told him danger was approaching. Time had changed Miller. The once jovial captain now bore a jagged scar along his jawline, and his left hand was a sophisticated prosthetic, military-grade technology not available to the public. Behind him, the glow of multiple computer screens cast an eerie blue light across the room. James's mind flashed back to their last mission together, Operation Sandstorm in Kandahar. Miller's helicopter had gone down in enemy territory. The brass declared it a total loss with no survivors after a week of searching. James had carried Miller's dog tags for months afterward, a reminder of another brother lost to war. "You're supposed to be dead," James said flatly, his hand never leaving Shadow's fur. Miller's laugh was hollow. "Officially I am. Death has its advantages when you're hunting ghosts, James." Outside, Detective Chen positioned herself near a broken window, straining to hear the conversation while staying out of sight. Her recorder captured every word as rain soaked through her jacket. When they entered, the room looked empty. There was only a metal table and 2 chairs in the middle. Miller placed a file on the table. James's heart raced. That was the file. "Do you remember Operation Phantom, James?" Miller asked with a bitter smile. James's jaw tightened. Of course he remembered. The mission that changed his life. Meanwhile, Shadow was sniffing the corners of the room, moving nervously as if looking for something. "That mission cost me everything," James said quietly. The memories flooded back. The village in northern Syria, intelligence reports of chemical weapons, and the strike order that came directly from General Hargrove himself. James had always suspected the intel was flawed, but orders were orders. A flash drive sat between Miller's artificial fingers, tapping rhythmically against the metal table. "This contains evidence that Operation Phantom was based on fabricated intelligence. Someone wanted that village destroyed, James. Someone high up the chain of command." Behind a false wall, Lieutenant Olivia Nash listened intently. As Hargrove's aide, she'd been tasked with tracking down all remaining evidence of Operation Phantom. The general had assured her it was a matter of national security, but what she was hearing contradicted everything she'd been told. Shadow's behavior grew more agitated as he detected Nash's presence. His training as a combat tracking dog made him virtually impossible to hide from. Miller continued, "There's a lot they didn't tell you, James. It wasn't just civilians who died that day." James held his breath. "Then who?" he asked, and Miller's expression hardened. "I was ordered to kill you, but I couldn't do it. Instead, I disabled you." James's hand moved to his gun, but Miller raised his hand. "If I wanted to kill you, I would have done it already," he said. Then he opened the file on the table and pulled out photos. The images showed James's old unit, all 8 members, with red X's marked across 6 faces. Only James and Miller remained unmarked. Clipped to each photo was a death certificate, all listing different causes: accident, suicide, heart failure, drowning. Too many coincidences. "They're eliminating loose ends," Miller explained, his artificial hand clenching. "I've been tracking patterns for years, staying off the grid. You've been protected because of your high-profile status, war hero with a miraculous rescue story. Killing you would raise too many questions." From her hiding spot, Nash silently photographed the documents with her phone. General Hargrove had told her this was about protecting state secrets, not covering up murders. Detective Chen, still listening from outside, texted her lieutenant, "Need backup at 1458 Riverside Industrial. Military connection confirmed, possible conspiracy." Shadow suddenly started barking. When James turned around, there were 2 armed men at the door. "It was hard getting you here, James. Now we're going to take the file and leave, and you're not going to do anything." Miller's voice had changed. James recognized the men, private military contractors who often handled the military's dirtiest work. The insignia on their tactical gear matched a security firm run by Colonel Richards's brother. "You set me up," James said to Miller, whose expression remained unreadable. James slowly stood up, looked at Shadow, and whispered a single word: "Ready." The dog sprang into action immediately. The room light suddenly went out. In the darkness, there were only barking sounds and shouts. James instinctively ducked and drew his gun. He knew where Shadow was because he could feel him. Their bond was a matter of life and death on the battlefield. Gunshots echoed. When the room lit up again, Miller was lying on the floor, along with the two men. The contractors lay motionless, but Miller was still breathing, blood pooling beneath him. Shadow had incapacitated one attacker, while James had neutralized the other. Miller had taken 2 bullets meant for James. "They weren't my men," Miller gasped, clutching his chest. "Double cross. Richards knew. I'd contact you." Outside, sirens wailed as Detective Chen's backup approached. Lieutenant Nash had slipped away, the evidence safely stored on her phone. James quickly reached for the file on the table. Shadow came to his side, slightly wounded but standing. Blood matted the fur on his right shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. "Good job, buddy," said James, stroking the dog's head. When he opened the file, his eyes widened. The truth inside was much darker than he thought. Operation Phantom was just a cover. The real operation was them. James and his team had been used as lab rats, and now he had the proof in his hands. "We need to go," James told Shadow, hearing the approaching sirens. "But first," he knelt beside the dying Miller. "Who else knows?" James asked urgently. Miller coughed, blood speckling his lips. "Find Dr. Vasquez. She created us." His eyes closed as his breathing stopped. The file contained detailed reports on Project Eclipse, a classified military program aimed at enhancing soldier capabilities through experimental drugs and neural implants. James flipped through pages of clinical data, his hands shaking as he recognized the names of his former squad members listed as test subjects. His own name was there too, with a special notation: Subject 7, Enhanced Symbiotic Response. Having narrowly escaped the police, James and Shadow had taken refuge in an abandoned subway maintenance room. James spread the documents across a dusty workbench while Shadow kept watch at the entrance. The wound on Shadow's shoulder had been hastily bandaged with strips from James's shirt. Each page revealed new horrors. Blood work showing experimental compounds, brain scans with highlighted areas of enhanced neural activity, and detailed logs of performance improvements in combat situations. James's team had excelled in ways that seemed impossible: enhanced night vision, extraordinary stamina, and instinctive coordination that borders on telepathy. Most disturbing were the notes on the animal program. Shadow wasn't just any military dog, he had been genetically modified, part of the symbiotic pairing experiment. That explained their uncanny connection, how Shadow seemed to anticipate his thoughts, how they moved in perfect synchronization. "They played God with us," James muttered, sliding the documents back into the file. A memory surfaced, Shadow finding him amid the chaos after an ambush, despite James being unconscious and buried under debris. No ordinary dog could have done that. Lieutenant Nash sat in her car several blocks away, reviewing the photos she'd taken. Her hands trembled as she read about Project Eclipse. General Hargrove had personally overseen the program, authorizing experimental procedures without proper oversight or consent. James's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old training grounds. Come alone. Dr. Colonel Richards." James's instincts told him it was a trap, but he needed answers. "We're not going alone," he told Shadow, reaching for his phone to call the one person he still trusted. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been the medical officer assigned to James's unit during his final year of service. She had left the military around the same time James did, citing ethical concerns about her work. Now she ran a small veterinary clinic on the outskirts of the city. "I always wondered when you'd show up," she said, when James arrived at her clinic after hours, Shadow at his side. Her dark eyes moved from James to the dog. "Both of you." Elena's hands were steady as she treated Shadow's wound, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. The small clinic smelled of antiseptic and animal fur. Certificates on the wall spoke of her expertise in both human and veterinary medicine, an unusual combination that now made perfect sense. I joined the project believing we were developing better trauma care for soldiers, she explained, applying a healing salve to Shadow's shoulder. By the time I realized what they were really doing, I was in too deep. You knew? James asked, placing the file on her desk. Elena nodded grimly. Not everything. I was brought in during the final phases. They told me I was monitoring standard combat enhancement drug trials. By the time I realized what was really happening, it was too late. James studied her face, looking for deception. Miller said you created us. Created the bonding process, she corrected. I specialized in interspecies neural mapping, studying how humans and animals communicate. They weaponized my research. Detective Chen had tracked them to the clinic and watched from across the street. Her partner had advised her to call in tactical support, but something held her back. The pieces weren't fitting together. Inside, Elena opened a drawer and removed a small device resembling a handheld ultrasound. This will show us exactly what they put inside both of you. She opened a cabinet and pulled out a small medical scanner, running it over Shadow's body. The device beeped, displaying a three-dimensional image of the dog's skeletal structure. Small metallic nodes were visible along Shadow's spine and at the base of his skull. Neural transmitters, Elena explained. They're designed to sync with identical implants in your brain, James. That's why you can communicate so effectively. The connection was meant to be temporary, active only during missions. But something happened during Operation Phantom. The screen shifted to show historical data, brainwave patterns from both James and Shadow collected during their military service. The patterns started distinctly different, but gradually synchronized over time, eventually achieving near-perfect harmony during combat operations. The earliest tests used direct neural implants with hardwired connections, Elena continued, showing James photos of the first test subjects, soldiers with visible cranial ports connected to modified wolves. The results were promising but impractical for field use. Project Eclipse evolved to use wireless transmission with nanotechnology implants. Lieutenant Nash had reached out to an old journalism contact, Marcus Tate, sending him encrypted portions of the evidence. Tate had been investigating military medical experiments for years, but never had concrete proof. What? James asked, his mind reeling from the implications. The neural bond was supposed to dissolve after 48 hours. In your case, it didn't. It grew stronger. She looked at Shadow with a mixture of fascination and concern. The connection became permanent and evolved beyond what the designers intended. James remembered the countless times Shadow had saved his life, had known exactly what to do without commands. Is it dangerous? Not in the way you might think, Elena said carefully, but it made you both valuable assets. Too valuable. Miller said he was ordered to kill me. Elena nodded. When the project was shut down, they needed to eliminate all evidence. Most of your team died in accidents over the following year. And now they're after me again because of the stolen files, James concluded. Not just that, Elena said, pulling a small device from her pocket. The neural technology in you and Shadow is worth billions. Military applications, medical breakthroughs, the ability to transfer consciousness between hosts. The possibilities are endless. They don't just want the files back, they want you. The old training grounds were deserted when James arrived at dawn. Shadow moved silently beside him, alert to every sound. James had left the original file with Elena, keeping only digital copies on the USB drive. He had also brought something else, a small EMP device Elena had given him, designed to temporarily disable the neural transmitters if necessary. Morning fog concealed their approach as they navigated the overgrown obstacle course. The place had been abandoned years ago when budget cuts forced the military to consolidate facilities. For James, each step triggered memories, rigorous training sessions, competitive challenges between units, and the gradually developing connection with Shadow that had seemed so natural at the time. Detective Chen watched through binoculars from a distant hilltop, having followed James discreetly. She'd contacted her lieutenant again, but the response was troubling. Stand down. Operation transferred to federal jurisdiction. Something wasn't right. Marcus Tate had begun publishing redacted versions of Nash's documents, carefully protecting his source while exposing the existence of Project Eclipse. The first article had already gone viral, forcing Pentagon officials into damage control mode. James, Colonel Richards, emerged from the shadows of an old obstacle course. He looked older than James remembered, his face lined with stress. "I'm glad you came." "Cut the act, Richards," James said coldly. "I know about Project Eclipse. I know what you did to me in Shadow, to my entire team." Richards sighed. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The project had noble intentions, creating more effective soldier canine teams, saving lives in combat situations. By turning us into lab rats? By pushing the boundaries of what was possible, Richards corrected. And in your case, we succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. You and Shadow achieved something remarkable, a true symbiotic relationship that enhanced both your capabilities. At what cost? James demanded. My entire team is dead. Someone just tried to kill me. That wasn't my doing, Richards insisted. There's a faction within the government that wants the technology buried, and all evidence along with it. Another faction wants to weaponize it. I've been trying to protect you. By sending Miller after me? Miller went rogue years ago, Richards said, his expression darkening. He sold information about Project Eclipse to foreign interests. The men with him weren't working for me. Shadow suddenly growled, his ears pricking forward. James felt it too, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. We're not alone, he said quietly. Richards nodded almost imperceptibly. They followed me. I'm sorry, James. I thought I was careful. A red dot appeared on Richards's chest. James shouted a warning, but it was too late. The shot rang out, and Richards collapsed. Lieutenant Nash watched through a scope as General Hargrove's private security team moved into position around the training ground. She had disobeyed direct orders by coming here, but the truth had become more important than her career. Shadow barked once, and James knew exactly what to do. They moved in perfect synchronization, taking cover behind a concrete barricade as bullets peppered the ground around them. We need to get to the north exit, James whispered to Shadow, knowing the dog understood. On 3. Detective Chen made a split-second decision and fired at one of the snipers, revealing her position but giving James a momentary advantage. Her police badge meant nothing now. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. They broke cover simultaneously, James firing his weapon at the hidden snipers while Shadow led the way through the training course. They'd run this maze 100 times during training, and their muscle memory was perfect. A bullet grazed James's arm, and he felt Shadow's momentary distress through their connection. The pain registered in both of them, an echo of shared sensation that had saved them countless times in combat. Another shooter appeared ahead, and without command, Shadow launched himself at the man, taking him down with precision. Tate's article had gone viral, forcing news networks to cover the story. Helicopter cameras captured distant footage of the firefight at the training grounds, broadcasting it live across the nation. What had begun as a cover-up was now exploding into public view. They made it to the tree line beyond the training grounds, but James knew they couldn't outrun their pursuers forever. He reached for the EMP device Elena had given him. This might be our only chance, buddy, he told Shadow. If I disable our transmitters, they can't track us through our neural signatures, but it might affect our connection. Shadow looked at him with those intelligent eyes, and James felt a wave of determination through their bond. The dog understood the risk and accepted it. James activated the device. A sharp pain shot through his head, and he saw Shadow wince. For a terrifying moment, the familiar presence in his mind faded, and he felt utterly alone. Then, gradually, the connection returned, different, but still there. Not technological anymore, but something deeper. Something truly symbiotic that no device could create or destroy. "Let's go home, buddy," James said, and they disappeared into the forest. 6 months later, a small cabin in the mountains of Wyoming received an unexpected visitor. Elena Vasquez stepped out of her car, looking around cautiously before approaching the door. James welcomed her inside, shadow alert but friendly at his side. The cabin was simple but comfortable, isolated from the world. A wood stove provided warmth against the mountain chill, and large windows offered panoramic views of the wilderness that had become their sanctuary. The media storm had eventually subsided. Tate's exposé had led to congressional hearings, with General Hargrove facing multiple charges. Lieutenant Nash had testified, bringing crucial evidence that corroborated the leaked documents. Detective Chen had been initially suspended, but later reinstated with commendation after the full scope of the conspiracy emerged. "They've stopped looking for you," Elena said as she accepted a cup of coffee. "Officially, anyway. The files you leaked anonymously caused quite a stir. Project Eclipse has been completely shut down." James had watched the hearings from this remote hideaway, seeing familiar faces testify about experiments he had unwittingly been part of. The public outrage had forced accountability, but James had no desire to return to that world. "And the others?" James asked. "The other test subjects?" "Most were already gone," Elena said sadly. "But there were 3 other dog handler pairs we managed to find and treat. They're safe now, scattered across the country with new identities." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. "I brought something for Shadow, a new treatment that should help his body gradually break down the remaining neural hardware safely." As she administered the injection to the patient dog, she studied James curiously. "The EMP should have completely severed your connection, but from what you've told me, it didn't." James smiled, reaching down to scratch behind Shadow's ears. "The technology started something, but it became more than that. We developed a real bond, one that doesn't need implants or transmitters." "A true symbiosis," Elena murmured. "That was always the theoretical goal of the project, but no one thought it was actually possible." After Elena left, James sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the sunset with Shadow beside him. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the dark experiments that had connected them, and the genuine bond that had grown beyond science's intentions. "We're free now, buddy," he told Shadow, who rested his head on James's knee. "No more running, no more looking over our shoulders." Shadow looked up at him with those knowing eyes, and James felt that familiar warmth in his mind, not the artificial connection of Project Eclipse, but something real that had grown between a man and his loyal companion. In the distance, a lone wolf howled, and Shadow's ears perked up, but he made no move to leave James's side. They had found their peace, their freedom, and their home, together. The nightmare still came sometimes. Blood on the ground, chaos all around, Shadow standing protectively over him. But now, when James woke, sweating and disoriented, Shadow was there, a solid presence in the darkness, reminding him that they had survived, that they were safe. And as the seasons changed in their mountain sanctuary, James Wilson, once Subject 7 of Project Eclipse, found something he had thought was lost forever: hope for a future beyond shadows.